Welcome to Murder by Nature, where we discuss true crime, mysterious disappearances, and unsolved cases. I am your host, Jasmine Hernandez. I'm coming back in to re-record this part because it's not wanting to load properly, so it may sound a little different. I'm so sorry. But welcome back. I hope you guys had a wonderful year. I've decided to switch things up over here at Murder by Nature and move our release date to Monday evenings. We've learned that doing the podcast while working and being a full-time mom is a tad difficult with a Saturday morning release date. I work full-time, I do digital marketing, and on top of that, I have beautiful children that go to school, are in sports, and we have a busy schedule over here. So I found that having a Saturday release date is just a little taxing on my mental health and just trying to get a quality episode out to you guys. So I'm going to move those to Mondays, so I have Saturdays and Sundays to record my episodes and be able to get those ready for that Monday release date. I've been trying really hard on getting episodes out beforehand, but honestly, it hasn't been working in my favor. So I think moving these to Monday release dates is really going to help. I want to thank you all for bearing with me during this difficult time. I really never thought I was going to do something like this. I've always wanted to, but actually getting in front of a microphone and talking about these cases, I research cases day in and day out without even recording them. Even TikTok right now, I have a case going that I want to do a podcast for, but I need to be able to work out my emotions for it because some of them are just really, really, really sad. And I hold a lot of things within myself when doing these cases. But this case, I actually found while diving through Facebook. It was something that popped up when I was scrolling. A friend of these victims actually put the case out there to get more attention to it because they felt like the case wasn't getting the attention that it deserved. But as with every case, please be mindful when you're going and researching, finding different things, going through all that stuff. With that being said, we're going to jump into our case today. Our references for today are macrondaily.com, Kaylee'sTrueCrime.com, Case Text, PeopleVsDefendant.com, Fox2Detroit.com, TheSympanatic.com, Reddit.com, People.com, Oxygen.com, TheDailyMail.co.uk, NewYorkPost.com, and DailyCrime.com. With that, we'll jump into the case. Danielle and Seren were living with Danielle's family in a mobile home rented by Robert Joseph, can't pronounce her last name. This was Danielle's father in Clinton Township. Danielle and Bryan, which was her boyfriend, Seren, shared a room, and Robert, their father, was sleeping in the living room of the home because his son, Kevin, and his girlfriend, Erin, were staying in the only other bedroom. The family resided in this home for about a month and had a history of frequent moves due to eviction for failing to pay rent. Now, I always want to say when it comes to something like this, we never know the story on why they're failing to pay rent. We don't really know what's happening within this family and those dynamics. But I will say, as I was researching this case, there was a lot of tragedy that kind of struck this family before they even got to this point in their life with what's going to happen. Robert lost his wife when his children were a little bit younger, and having to deal with the loss of a spouse and raising children on your own, it's very taxing and takes a toll on your soul. Robert ended up developing a drinking problem, and his children from interviews were really relying on themselves to raise themselves. Danielle was 18, they had Kevin, and then they had Robert Jr. So taking care of 3 children that are young and having to deal with the transition of losing a parent, I think really took a toll on this family as a whole, which kind of goes into them moving from house to house to house frequently and getting evicted because a lot of that time you don't know how to establish stability. And when you are an alcoholic, a lot of your money does go to drinking. So I don't want to paint her father in a bad light, but I know I've seen comments on this with them moving over and over and over, and I really wanted to shed my opinion or just other viewpoints before people kind of speculate on what that came into. Robert, Danielle's father, did paintwork for a general contractor, and his son Robert Jr. worked with him most of the time. Now, Kevin only worked when he needed money, from what they're saying. The contractor let the 3 of them, though, have a white work van for jobs, but they also did use it for personal purposes. Danielle and Seren began working the night shift at National Coney Island with a friend, Danielle's friend. I'm not going to say the first name, but the last name is Whaley. Because Danielle and Seren didn't have a vehicle, Whaley would drive them to and from work. On August 22nd, 2018, the three went to work around 9 p.m., and Whaley dropped Danielle and Seren off at home around 8 a.m. So they worked like the night shift, graveyard shift. On August 23rd, 2018, when she dropped them off, Whaley noticed the white work van was outside. Danielle's father, Robert, left for work that day around 8:15 a.m., saying goodbye to Danielle. This was the last time Danielle and Seren were going to be seen alive. Now, Whaley, Danielle, and Seren were scheduled to work that evening, August 23rd, 2018, and Whaley was giving the other two a ride. It was normal. It's what they did. But around 1 p.m. that day, Whaley attempted to contact Danielle by Facebook Messenger to inform her that she was having vehicle problems and wouldn't be able to drive the three to work that evening. Around 5 p.m., she sent a message to Danielle again, informing her that she thought she found them a ride to work. But then again at 7 p.m., she sent a third message saying that the ride had fell through. Now, however, none of these messages were being successfully delivered to Danielle's phone because it was turned off. This concerned her because Danielle was always on her phone, and she carried a phone charger everywhere she went. Moreover, Danielle was a responsible employee, and it was unusual for her to miss work without contacting her employer. However, Danielle and Seren didn't show up for work that night. This was worrisome for Danielle's friend. She was unable to get in touch with Danielle, and the last time she saw her is when she dropped her off at home the day before. Around 5 p.m. on August 24th, 2018, she went to Danielle's home to check on her. Robert and Robert Jr. were both home. Danielle's father was slightly intoxicated and initially refused to let Whaley into the home. After several minutes, however, he let her enter, and the two talked in the living room for some time. Danielle's brother, Robert Jr., was present during this conversation, but he didn't participate in the conversation. He kind of just was sitting there listening in. As Whaley was there, she went to go check Danielle and Seren's room to look around and see if maybe she would find anything out of the ordinary. When entering the room, she didn't notice anything, but the room seemed more disorganized than Danielle usually kept it. In addition, the blanket and top sheet on the bed were not what Danielle usually used. Danielle's phone charger was on her pillow, and the pillows were missing from the bed. Sorry, Danielle's phone charger was on her bed. I read pillow This was extremely odd to her. Danielle was a person who always had her phone charger and had certain things a certain way. After checking the room, Whaley stayed in the home until around 8 p.m. She called several of Danielle's friends to see if anyone else heard from her, and at some point while she was there, Robert Jr. left in the work van. Now, she went to work shortly after, but she ended up leaving work early to return back to Danielle's home around 5 a.m. on August 25th, 2018. She woke up Robert, Danielle's dad, who was still drunk, and argued with him about reporting Danielle and Seren missing to the police. She knew something was wrong, but she couldn't pinpoint exactly what was going on. Danielle would get sometimes eager, like most teens that age, and she would leave for an extended amount of days to hang out with friends, but this seemed weird. Eventually, to get Robert to get into her vehicle, she told him that she was going to go for more liquor, but instead she took him to the police station. This is where they reported Danielle missing. Because Danielle's brother had warrants out for his arrest, the police were likely to investigate where Danielle lived, so Robert insisted that they tell the police that Danielle and Seren lived with her. Sadly, though, the police would not let them report Seren missing because they were not related to him. Even though he was last seen with Danielle and she's missing, they still had to have a family member report him missing. Later that day or early that following day, because it was so weird in the time, around that time, Allison, a friend of Danielle's, and several other friends went to Danielle's house to look around. Now, while Whaley, Allison, and all of them had been attempting to contact Danielle, it was still unsuccessful, and it was becoming concerning. Robert let Allison and the others in to look around the house to see if they were able to find anything that would lead them to where Danielle was. In the bedroom, Allison found Danielle's duffel bag, laptop, purse, and blood glucose meter. This is very important to note. When you're diabetic, you have to have your blood sugar checked and all of that, and her meter was left in her room. She also found Seren's wallet, which contained his ID card. While all of the other friends noticed the blood on the mattress, Whaley didn't. But none of them really thought anything of it, though, because Danielle had a miscarriage a few months before. Allison placed all of the items she found on the bed and took a picture of it. She left them there for Whaley to pick up and take to the police. Danielle had diabetes and was dependent on insulin to maintain her condition. For her glucose meter and medication to be at the house was extremely concerning for friends. So I really want you guys to understand that when someone has medical issues and those devices or those medications that they have are not with them, immediately that would raise red flags, at least for me. I would immediately be like, no, something's wrong. On the evening of August 26, 2018, Kevin and Erin, Danielle's brother and his girlfriend, went to the home to discuss Danielle and Seren's disappearance with Robert Sr. Days had been going by and no one was able to find them. Around 6 p.m., Whaley and Erin took the items Allison found to the police station and returned to the home to continue the discussion with the family. When Kevin looked around Danielle and Seren's bedroom, he didn't notice any blood or signs of struggle, nor did the room seem messier than usual. But something seemed off. He couldn't pinpoint what it is, but something seemed off. Kevin checked the window and then went outside to check the grass outside the window, when he then walked around the house and noticed a really, really large amount of flies on the back of the shed. When Kevin went inside to get the key to the shed from the kitchen, the key was gone. But the lock on the shed had came from a storage unit that Kevin and Erin shared, and Erin still had the spare key. Kevin alerted everyone that something was in the shed and that they needed to find out what was going on. Using the spare key, Kevin unlocked the shed. Robert Sr. and Whaley were with Kevin when he opened the shed to see what was going on. Immediately inside the shed were a box spring and lawnmower. Kevin ended up removing these items and noticed in the back of the shed there were 2 large plastic bags. Robert Sr. used a box cutter to cut open the opening of one of the bags and a leg came out. Everyone stopped in their tracks, not knowing what to do or what they were supposed to do next. They all left the shed and called the police immediately. Kevin was the person to make the call to the police. He said that Danielle and her boyfriend had been missing and there was a strange smell coming from the shed. When the police arrived, Kevin and his dad Robert were outside. They explained that Danielle and Seren were missing and that they had gone to the shed as there looked to be like this smell and flies coming from it. Both bags were transported to the morgue as they were found. Dr. Mary performed autopsies on both the victims. Both of the bodies had begun to decompose. The bodies were confirmed to be Danielle and Seren. Seren Bryan was wrapped in 5 plastic bags. 3 of the bags were around his head and neck. 1 bag was around his lower body, and 1 was around his upper body. There was duct tape over his lower mouth and the sides of his face and the back of his neck. The doctor believed that the tape was initially over his nose and at one point, but had slipped during the decomposition of the body. He had 3 scalp lacerations on the back of his head from blunt force trauma. According to the doctor, these blows occurred while he was still alive and would have rendered him unconscious, but the head injuries are not what caused his death. Instead, it was determined that his cause of death was due to asphyxiation due to suffocation. His knees were at his chest and his arms were over his knees in the bags. His wrists and ankles were bound separately and then together with duct tape, holding him in position. Danielle was wrapped in 3 plastic bags. 1 bag was around her whole body and 2 were around her head and neck. There was duct tape around her head, which was also over her nostrils and her mouth, but she had duct tape around her neck too. Danielle had several lacerations from blunt force trauma that scattered across her scalp and several skull fractures. While the skull fractures would have not been instantly fatal, the doctor determined that she couldn't decide whether she died from the fractures or asphyxiation by suffocation. Danielle was positioned similar to Seren. Her knees were up to her chest and her ankles were bound by duct tape. Her wrists were not bound, but there was a loop of duct tape around her ankles, suggesting that Danielle's wrists were bound there at one point in time. Now, they both were wearing only shirts and underwear, and the doctor found no signs of strangulation or defense wounds on either Danielle or Seren. She also found that there was no signs of CPR performed on either of the bodies, which is a little concerning. This shows that whoever did this or that they had no concern to go back and try and save them. They weren't trying to help them. Now, police searched the shed in which Danielle and Seren's body were discovered, and they also searched inside the home. In the shed, officers found a plastic bag that contained several items, most of which had blood on them. They found pillows, makeup kits, needles for checking blood glucose levels, a 27-ounce rubber Husky dead blow hammer, an empty duct tape roll, and some black duct tape and a fitted sheet. The sheet matched the sheet that was on Danielle's bed previously. Police also found blood splatter under a dolly on a TV stand in their room and on the underside of a makeup station. There was blood stains on the carpet under the hamper in the room, and with the assistance of Blue Star, there appeared to be a blood on the wall and the floor, which was cleaned up. Behind a panel in a walk-in closet near Danielle's room, where the hot water heater was located, officers found a roll of black duct tape with a bloody fingerprint on the inside of the roll and a number of other items with blood spatter on them, including a pair of pants, paint with the pants that had on it, a shirt, various towels, and an infinity box. Now, while the officers were looking around the house for more clues, Kevin was able to identify a pair of shorts and a shirt that belonged to his brother, Robert Jr. Now, Ashley Motor, she was a forensic biologist with the Michigan State Police, performed a number of DNA tests on these items. She found that 3 individuals contributed to the DNA on the handle of the Husky hammer, including Danielle, Seren, and Robert Jr.'s. Danielle and Seren's blood also was found on the head of the hammer. Bloodstains from the clothing presented matched the DNA from Robert Jr., Danielle, and Kevin. And Danielle's blood was also found on the hamper and the mirror of the bedroom. Now, soon after the bodies were discovered, police turned their attention to Robert Jr. as he was the only one of those who resigned or had resigned in the home that had access to the shed. But he was also the only other resident that was unaccounted for. Robert's phone received a call in the area of the home around 10:13 a.m. on August 23, 2018. At 1:22 p.m. that same day, Robert ordered a cab with his phone to Shamrock Cab Company, and the cab picked him up from his home and took him to Wendy's at the corner of 15th Mile Road and the highway over there, about 2 miles from his home. Now, he arrived here at 1:42 p.m. Robert then called Williams Carpet Care around 1:35 p.m., and then he took a bus down 15 Mile Road, and when he exited the bus, he entered a Tim Hortons. After he was at Tim Hortons, he left and crossed the street where Robert Sr. picked him up in the work van, and they returned home at 5:30 p.m. Now, these details are really hard to say and to read. But I think with having the details and seeing the brutality of what happened is going to give you a better idea of where the court was coming from in this. And we'll go through that in just a little bit. Now, at least until August 26, 2018, the day before the bodies were found, Robert Jr. remained in Clinton Township. Now, Danielle's friends saw Robert Jr. at the home on August 24, 2018, and again on August 26, 2018. See, that's when he left. If you remember, he left. When she was there and she was going through everything, he left. And when he left, he went to Riverfront Inn, where he paid cash for a room. At 10:25 p.m. the same day, Robert Jr. made a call from his cell phone to near the inn. When he vacated the inn, he left behind a computer, a cell phone, and other miscellaneous items. Around 2 a.m. on August 26, 2018, his work van was spotted in Toledo. This was reported to the police. The van was eventually found and seized from a market in Toledo, and on August 28, 2018, Robert took a Greyhound bus from Toledo to Cincinnati, arriving at 3:45 a.m. on August 29, 2018. Now, unknown to him, though, the Toledo police already provided a picture of him to the Greyhound attendant, who reported Robert purchasing a ticket to the police. After spending some time at the Greyhound station in Cincinnati, Robert asked the employees if they had access to a computer. And they did. They had a library that had computer access, and they directed him to that library. Now, when he was in the library, the Greyhound employees ended up calling the police. And when the police arrived at the Greyhound station, The employees informed the police of the fact that he was in the library and he needed a computer. The police successfully arrested Robert at the library that day without any incident. Now, while he was in Ohio, Robert was wearing a blonde wig, a hat, sunglasses, and went by the name of Josh Bianca Arbanco. They weren't really sure. He kind of switched between both of them. He also utilized a reloadable card charger. So I guess this would be equivalent to like a chime card. And he used cash to make his purchases. On August 31st, the police questioned Robert back in Clinton Township. Robert told the police that he wanted to talk and asked what his charges were. The police told him that he was being charged with premeditated first-degree murder. He asked what premeditated meant, and the police told him it meant that he planned it out. Just when the police thought he was going to confess to the murders, he was here, they had all the evidence, he was going to confess. No. Instead, he asked if he could call his brother Kevin. The conversation was recorded like many are in this situation, and during the phone call, Kevin asks, "Are you going to plead guilty?" And unfortunately, Robert says no. Now, this didn't stop police from keeping the arrest and going through with the trial. They had boatloads of information. They had a ton of evidence. They knew they had their person. During the trial, Kevin testified that in November of 2011, Robert was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and paranoia, and that he had been hospitalized several times due to erratic behavior for a total of 3 to 4 weeks over the course of 9 years. According to Kevin, Robert did not believe in his diagnosis, and therefore he would not take his medication that was prescribed to him. He was on 2 different medications. I'm not going to say the names, but he was on 2 different medications. A motive for the murders was never established, though. Robert's defense attorney said his client had mental illness and that he heard voices on the night that he murdered his sister and her boyfriend. He asked him 1,000,000 times why he would commit the murders, but Robert was never forthcoming on that information. He argued for leniency based on the diminishing responsibility. Basically, because he had mental illness, he didn't know what he was doing. He should have a leniency based on his sentence. However, the prosecution team argued that Robert had carefully planned the murders. He purchased the hammer, he purchased the duct tape, and he did this all before that day. He also bought a shovel, indicating that he initially planned to bury the young couple, and he also made a concerted effort to clean the crime scene and hide the bodies. He didn't just leave them there. He hid them. He locked the shed. He took the key. In Toledo, he wore a wig to hide his identity, and Robert, though he never confessed to these murders, it didn't, I think in this case, it didn't stop the jury from still finding him guilty. And I think that's the biggest thing. He never spoke on them. I'm guessing he thought maybe if he just kept his mouth shut that they wouldn't do it. But there was so much evidence that stacked against him. And on November 22nd, 2019, the jury found Robert guilty of both counts of premeditated murder, and the trial court sentenced Robert to the mandatory sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for both counts on January 14th, 2020. At sentencing, the judge for the circuit court told Robert, "You're an evil man and you're going where you belong." Now, you would think maybe that's the end of this case. It's not. On July 31st, 2020, after filing his claim of appeal with the court, Robert moved the trial court to either hold a Gunther hearing or grant him a new trial. His motion was basically said that on the claim of ineffective counsel, and we're going to go into this. Although he acknowledged that whether to call an expert witness is a matter of the trial strategy, he noted that basically he was mentally ill and that his attorney didn't implicate when the counsel failed to engage for a reasonable investigation. And when failing to call an expert for the witness, that could have been his entire defense, and it could have been a substantial defense in his case. They said that he argued that trial counsel conceded that he killed Danielle and Seren and chose to emphasize his mental illness in an effort to convince the jury that he could not have premeditated the killings. But the counsel ineffectively failed to call an expert who could explain his mental illness and the effects of his failure to take the prescription medications. Instead, the counsel relied entirely on the testimony of a lay witness who could not explain the symptoms of his mental illness condition or the need for his medication. He argued that the expert could have explained that one of his medications could have treated sudden episodes of manic and decreased hallucinations, and while the other prescription, similar, could reduce the frequency and severity of the manic episodes. He argued such testimony was critical to his defense in the light of the trial's counsel's chosen strategy. Had it been presented to the jury, he may have gotten a lesser sense of what he has now. Now, I'm going to pause right here. I am someone that suffers from mental illness. I'm someone that suffers from a lot of different mental illnesses. And even then, I know that I would know right from wrong. And with mental illnesses and manic episodes, yes, they can present themselves very scarily. But my issue with his defense of using mental illnesses is that he was around his brother and he was also around his father during these times, before he worked with his dad, before and after. When you have mental episodes as what he is explaining, that's something that someone would have recognized. And from the testimonies of his family, they did not recognize that at that time. Also, during manic episodes, at least for me, I don't see that I would be able to carry out such a gruesome murder and then also clean everything up and hide the bodies from it. People who have mental illnesses, and I don't want this to be a caveat for someone, people that have mental illnesses, it's something that we deal with every single day. And when I look at episodes and that is their golden ticket as they try and see to argue, oh, I have a mental illness. Oh, I have this. Oh, I have that. It just hits me a little hard because the details of this case, I see what he's trying to do because he wants a lesser sentence, but I don't feel like that's what contributed to this crime or this motive. He still has never came forward and said what the motive was. There's nothing. He doesn't talk about it. And that's like a little concerning that there's no remorse at trial. There was no emotion. There was no, I'm sorry, nothing. He shows no remorse. He's never apologized. He's never admitted. He's never done anything to show that, which is why the mental illness episode kind of irks me, because if that was his case, if he really was in a manic state, there would be some form of remorse that he would have for his sister, his baby sister, and her boyfriend. But there still has been none from trial to now and all of that. That's why I don't believe this state. Now, the court held a motion hearing on October 13th, 2020, at which the parties argued consistently with their briefs. Robert also responded to the prosecutioner's argument, advising that the use of mental illness to dispute premeditated was not a diminishing capacity defense because premeditated was not the intent element. On November 17th, 2020, the court entered an opinion and ordered denying Robert's motion. The court recognized that he may present evidence of mental illness if relevant to some purpose other than the negate of the specific intent element of the charge offense, but concluded that premeditation is a specific intent element of premeditated murder. According to the trial court, they held the evidence that the mental illness introduced the negate premeditated would run in a full of the prosecution, and the trial counsel cannot be ineffective for failing to call an expert witness for this purpose. What this means is that his mental illness can't go to the element of intent. It can't, his premeditated, that's not what it is. And that they did their job in introducing that he did have a mental illness, but the expert could not say if he was able to premeditate or had the intent to due to this mental illness. And for that purpose, that he did not have an effective trial. Now, after his brother was sentenced to jail and Kevin is left with dealing with what that did to his family, they lost their mother at a young age. And now he ultimately lost his brother and lost his sister. Kevin went on to an interview later on at this time of the trial and everything. And he said that he doesn't hate his brother, but that he doesn't have his brother anymore. And that he doesn't forgive him for what he did. Danielle was the baby of the family. She was the baby sister. And for Kevin, I think it was very hard for him to, one, lose his mother, And then for his brother to gruesomely murder his sister, and now his brother's in jail and his father's an alcoholic. It's just, I think that's a lot for a family to take on. Even for Danielle's father. There's no comment on whether Danielle's father still talks to Robert Jr., but we do know that Kevin does not. Now, Seren and Bryan's mother, Diane, said that she's currently working on a program called Seren Shining Arts, and this is a program that gives kids sketchbooks to help them communicate through writing and drawing. From my research and what I found, these were two beautiful people with so much passion and growth and free spirit. They reminded me a lot of how I was when I was their age. And their life was just taken very soon by someone that Danielle shared blood with. It was said that Danielle and her brother argued a lot. They weren't close, but I argued with my siblings a lot, and I could never imagine this sort of thing to happen. With that brings us to the end of this episode. As always, thank you for listening to Murder by Nature. If you enjoyed our show, please rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any streaming platform you're currently on, and be sure to come back for our next episode. Until then, I am your host, Jasmine Hernandez. Don't forget to stay safe. Don't get murdered or murder people, you lovely humans. Have a lovely start to your week.